So next, I'd like to kindly invite Jessica Toroni to talk about the GCS funding things. So Jessica Toroni, let me briefly introduce her, has more than 20 years of experience in environment and development policy and has worked on the climate change adaptation program in the UN for the last 11 years. And today she's going to talk a little bit about how the GCF funding works in its mechanism. So floor is yours, yes.
Thanks. So thank you very much for having me. So yes, I work for the UNEP. I head the adaptation unit at UNEP based in Nairobi. I've been asked to say a few words about the Green Climate Fund and the potential for a cooling program to be designed for GCF funding. So I don't know how much you know about the Green Climate Fund, but let me just go through a few basics. How do I do this? Yeah. Okay. So you may know that there's a strategic plan for the GCF 2024 to 2027. We're in the second replenishment period. And top level results that the GCF has committed to achieve is a mitigation target of 1.5 to 2.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent reduced, and to enhance resilience for 570 to 900 million people. And then from there are lower level targets on infrastructure, clean energy, transport, buildings and industry, private sector early stage ventures, small and medium, micro and small and medium enterprises, and the banking sector. It's written into the GCF instrument that the fund should deliver balanced funding across mitigation and adaptation over time, and that 50% of its resources should be allocated to SIDS, LDCs, and African nations. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so again, forgive me if I'm telling you things you know. I'm not sure what you know, what you don't know, but basically it's important that you bear in mind the GCF investment criteria. I would say the two top-level investment criteria are impact potential and paradigm shift. And on impact potential, the two core impact indicators are GHG emissions reduced, avoided, or removed, and direct and indirect beneficiaries. There's also the paradigm shift investment criteria. This one really relates to enabling environment. So it's really what we would expect to deliver through the project, but also after the project. And there are three main areas to paradigm shift. There's scale, replicability, and sustainability. And then other investment criteria, country ownership, sustainable development, needs of the recipient, efficiency and effectiveness. But when it's important to understand that when we program under GCF, delivering impact within the project lifetime is the most important thing. And so I'm going to come back to that point. Okay, let's move forward. So I did a bit of an analysis yesterday. I listened to all of the arguments yesterday, and I did a bit of an analysis about how a cooling program for the GCF could be structured. So there are three main strands to cooling strategy. There's the passive cooling strand, and that's comprised of a building design, urban planning, and nature-based solutions. Then there's the technology strand, the super efficiency strand of cooling solutions, and then there's the phase out of HFCs. When we look at the type of project intervention, I've grouped them into enabling and investment. Now remember what I said about impact potential. If something is put forward for GCF programming, it's got to have a high impact potential. Now, when I look at these strands, the impact potential is going to come from nature-based solutions. Because the others are about the enabling environment. When you're looking at building design, you're looking at building codes, you're looking at training for architectural associations. training for construction companies, fiscal incentives, regulation. When you're looking at urban planning, you're talking about master plans, you're talking about flood zones, zoning of cities. When you're looking at cooling solutions, you're really talking about trying to get more R&D into more efficient solutions, and also financial models, financial incentives to help people buy these appliances. And then with phase out of HFCs, you're talking about regulation and financial incentives for R&D and so on. Now that might be a little bit simplistic, but that is what I'm seeing. I mean, for example, under building design, it could be that there's a massive social housing program in the country, and that actually GCF financing could top up that social housing program in terms of making it more resistant to heat, for example. But in general, I think that's basically the way that it would go. When you look at the project execution entity within the lifetime of, say, a 5 or 6 year project, I'm seeing the following. In terms of building design, urban planning, and the enabling environment, that's going to be government setting those incentives and those price signals. When it comes to nature-based solutions in an urban planning space, that's also going to be government. Remember, that's the investment component. And then when you look at the technology and the phasing out of HFCs, that's also government setting that regulation and those price incentives. When you look at the longer term investment beyond the project, then you start seeing private sector, private sector, private sector, private sector. Now, you may think, well, okay, why don't we construct a program that looks at the longer term investment, working with the private sector directly? And yes, you could do that. But then we're not talking about grant finance, we're in the realm of loans, equity investments, guarantees, and so forth. So it's really important that you understand, I'm going to flip to the next slide, that when you're looking at grant financing, it's for a particular set of activities. It's for investing in public goods, and that's where the green passive cooling solutions comes in. You're talking about TA capacity building. You're talking about investing in people whose ability to pay is low. So that's where the social housing could come in. Normally, what you tend to see is projects working with smallholder farmers in agriculture, subsistence level farmers, because their affordability to take out loans, but also their credit history, doesn't allow them to access credit. So using grant finance for that demographic is justifiable. Also, in terms of activities that don't have repayment mechanisms, there's no reflow. GCF will look at grant financing for that sort of a thing. And then also limited ability of the country to borrow, for example, IMF restrictions. So all of that could qualify for grant finance. But when you're working with the private sector and you know that you can charge for a service, then you're looking into the realm of loans, equity, and guarantees. And there's a principle, it's called the principle of minimum concessionality in the Green Climate Fund, that basically says the level of concessionality provided by the Green Climate Fund would be the minimum amount to make the project viable. So they look very, very closely at that, and it comes in under the investment principle of efficiency and effectiveness. I've put two words there, accreditation scope, to refer back to what I was saying. If you're working in the realm of grant finance, then UN institutions, GIZ, and so forth could be an accredited entity. But as soon as you start working in the realm of the private sector and non-grant finance, then you have to be partnering with a financial intermediary, a bank, and so forth, that's accredited to the GCF. Okay, so I also would just want to raise your awareness about performance indicators at the GCF. So I mentioned that the 2 top-level impact indicators is greenhouse gas reductions reduced and numbers of beneficiaries. Outcome indicators look for a cooling program would look something like the following: annual energy savings, installed renewable energy capacity, renewable energy generated. And on the adaptation front, beneficiaries adopting innovations that strengthen climate change resilience, and beneficiaries living in buildings that have increased resilience against climate hazards. And then on the enabling environment side, there are 4 indicators. One is strengthening institutional and regulatory frameworks. Second is technology development, dissemination, development or transfer of innovation. The third is market development, transformation at the sectoral, local or national level. And the fourth one is knowledge generation and learning processes. Okay, final slide. Is GCF for you? I've just noted a few things here from our experience. On the negative, it's a long process. You know, if you're embarking on a pathway for GCF financing, you need to be braced for at least a 4-year project development timeframe. That breaks down as a 1 year for concept note development and approval, 6 months for the access to project development funds, 2 years for funding proposal development, and 6 months for review, and that is optimistic. On the positive, and there are positives because, you know, we've got quite a few projects that we've developed for GCF, and I have worked on all of them, so I can tell you that there are positives. It gives a larger investment scale than other grant finance, that is for sure. Second one is that you can develop all of these initiatives that have been discussed, like EPIC and SCAF and so on. You can bring them to scale with GCF financing. Consider that a small project is up to 50 million. A medium-sized project is 250 million. Okay, so it gives you an example, an idea that it's an order of magnitude larger than what most grant finance pots will give you. It also, because it's a program, it gives you the possibility to integrate these 3 strands that I started off with, integrate it into a model for, say, cities to follow. And that leads me up to the third positive, which I think is really important, and that is the potential to create a blueprint for an integrated model that can be then scaled up and taken up by other cities. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. So now would you like to take a couple of minutes to ask Jessica from the audience? If you have any questions, feel free to raise the placard, please. Yes, Bahamas, please.
Thank you for the presentation. On the slide of is GCF for you. Representing the Bahamas, we understand that our GDP is noted to be considerably high. However, it is skewed because it's only accounting for the major populated islands. We have over 700 islands, 2,000 rocks and keys, sparsely scattered throughout the Caribbean. The question is, how can the Bahamas or other small island developing states who may have a high GDP access maximum GCF funding in relations to our GDP?
So first of all, the Bahamas is a SIDS, so you enter into the SIDS group. But the second thing to note is affordability. So you may have a high income, but you may also have a lot of debt. And so, you know, one of the investment criteria is needs of the recipient, and those arguments would come into that investment criteria. So typically we look at ability to borrow, debt levels, and vulnerability to climate change. So that can be, and in fact, I've had discussions with your Ministry of Environment in the Bahamas about programming there, but not on GCF, on Adaptation Fund. So it is possible. I mean, one of the GCF projects that we got funding for was Bahrain. I mean, Bahrain is an oil-producing country. It was very controversial at the time. I'm not sure if you follow the board meetings, but we did manage to get some funding from Bahrain for a water and climate change project, so it can be done.
And then Ghana, please.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation, and just to get some clarity, on the mitigation and adaptation aspect, and I was glad when you shared this about the negatives. Ghana actually applied to GCF and mitigation as far back as 2020. We are hoping to complete that this year in 2025. So indeed, indeed, it is actually very daunting. But that particular project was on renewables. We're trying to see how solar panels could be provided to also help in our electricity generation mix. So just to confirm how long the process is, we started in 2020, and we are hoping that in April 2025, we should be hearing some good news. I think as it stands now, that program is currently under, under implementation. So again, just to confirm that, but also if you can throw light on mitigation and adaptation under the GCF.
Sure, so with mitigation, anything that's to do with renewable energy, so let me just go back to this slide here. Okay, anything to do with renewable energy, anything that you can pay for that service, energy efficiency as well. If it's targeting the actual investment component, then you're not going to be able to get grant finance for that. That's going to be non-grant instruments, and then you have to partner with a bank or a financial intermediary. By the way, Ghana, we've got a project going to the board in July for Ghana. So, and that's been under development since 2018. But 63 million in grant finance. You'll be seeing it in July. So, yes, long project development timeframes, but, larger programs, take to scale, develop a model, and the blueprint that can be taken forward in other locations. So, no pain, no gain, I think, would apply.
Yes, Iraq, please.
Thank you very much. I agree with Ghana about the procedure to approve the projects. This is very difficult and required a long term to approve. That's affected on the priorities of countries. For example, when we're talking about the urgent projects, that's required 2 or 3 years, may be modified with the priority or strategy of countries. I believe we should restart or modify the procedure of GCF to deal with the projects according to priorities of countries. Thank you very much.
Okay, so no comment, I agree with you. I agree with you. So what else can I say? Yeah, I just wanted to say something about the MBS component, nature-based solutions. So I missed this morning's session, but I will look at the presentations. What I would like to know is what is the potential for nature-based solutions in cities to reduce temperature and to induce, comfort in the home and, working buildings and so on. Because if you were to put a cooling program together, you would need to show that impact potential. The impact potential, remember, is, hang on, where's the indicators? It's going, there's this number of beneficiaries adopting innovations, number of beneficiaries living in buildings that have increased resilience, but then there's also what we call co-benefits, and that would be the health benefits. So reduced morbidity, mortality, you know, and also in terms of economic activity. So I don't know to what extent those benefits in terms of nature-based solutions and passive cooling have been documented, because that would be a key argument to bring in. The other thing is also that in very built-up cities, it's difficult to retrofit for green measures. I don't know whether this has been tried or not, but you know, what we have found with nature-based solutions in cities is that we often have to go to secondary cities or to peri-urban areas where there is space to put in green passive cooling measures. So, I mean, that's also another consideration in terms of impact potential. Thank you.
So, Secretariat, you raise your card.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, Jessica. I have two questions. My first question was about also, you mentioned farmers, and I'm wondering, as a grouping, and so therefore I'm wondering if cold storage, for example, would be eligible for the grant financing, or if that's not in, like nature, or is it more like appliances in a different category? So that was my first question. And then my second question was just because, I mean, Jessica, you should all know, is very famous in UNEP for having raised, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars from the GCF for adaptation. So she's very savvy, although she speaks about the negatives. So I know that's one of your big successes. So thank you for sharing with all of us here how we can access it, the GCF. But you've also mentioned the Adaptation Fund. And maybe it's also worth hearing from you a little bit about that, or maybe you'd already planned that, but if not, it would be great to hear also about that. So those are my two questions. Thanks.
Okay, so answer to the first question is yes, we can. We can definitely get grant finance for agricultural cooling solutions if the project was focused on subsistence farmers, basically those farmers that cannot afford to pay for those solutions. Because if they're commercial farmers, then they can obviously get credit out, and they could, you know, they could club together as a group, for example. So as long as it's, as the project is focused on those that cannot pay or cannot access credit to pay, then it's fine, and we do that all the time. In terms of the Adaptation Fund, yes, it's easier to access for sure, and it's open to all countries, and the cap now has been raised to $40 million per country. You can't access it in one go. You have to have at least one project that's been programmed, but the cap has been raised, so yes. Now, the thing with the Adaptation Fund is that it's fantastic, it's much easier to access, but you know, these would be single country projects, and that might be fine. Maybe that's what you want to do, okay? But think about whether you want to design a cooling program that is going to be bigger and have more visibility and potentially be more impactful because of that visibility. I mean, you can do both. But, you know, those are just some of the considerations that I think would need to be thought through. Thank you.
Just, sorry, just under that, one other further question with the Adaptation Fund. So would it be the same focus, like it should be focused on nature-based solutions because of the need in terms of it not being commercial? Or under the Adaptation Fund, there could also be active cooling as well? As a means to respond to extreme heat.
Yeah, there would need to be an investment component. Like the GCF, the Adaptation Fund, 80% of the resources have to be spent on investments. And it's because the decision, the UNFCCC decision on the Adaptation Fund, the foundational decision says that Adaptation Fund resources need to be spent on concrete. It's a bit of an unfortunate word, but concrete adaptation options. But what they mean really is investments.
Okay.
So, so normally there's no written rule, but normally we apply a yardstick of 80% investment, 20% enabling activities.
And Nigeria, please.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. I want to just ask, I think, just 2 questions. Firstly, you've been with the climate change adaptation program for over years. Have you had any success, recorded any successes in mobilizing funds from the GCF based on adaptation project? Like, is there any successes in submitting adaptation projects, like proposals? Have you been able to tap into any of the grants from GCF, or is just from the adaptation fund? Because we are aware that GCF is really focused on mitigation or maybe adaptation projects that have mitigation benefits, co-benefits.
Oh wow, that's interesting to note your perspective or your understanding. I should have started off by saying, no, we've got a list of sorry, I have to take my glasses off. 7 projects approved with the GCF, and they are all adaptation or adaptation with mitigation co-benefits. So let me just say, the Gambia, Benin, Paraguay, Laos PDR, Bahrain, Tanzania, that was approved in 2023, and Jordan in 2024. We've got 2 projects going to the board, adaptation projects going to the board in July, Ghana and Mauritania. And we've got 2 under a development with GCF funding, and that's Mozambique and Dominica. So that makes a total of 10, and then we've got a couple of early warning systems projects as well. So I think we've accumulated quite a lot of experience in programming on adaptation for the GCF, as well as the adaptation fund.
All right, so thank you so much for that. And also, I've been thinking for Nigeria, like I'm speaking as Nigeria now, what if we come up with a project, with a proposal, in developing maybe renewable energy for supporting cooling solutions in rural communities, something like that that can actually, okay, now we are helping to cut emissions, because I know your impact potentials for GCF is really about the impact potential is for reduce or avoided emissions. So with the renewable energy in supporting cooling in rural areas, maybe especially for women that are into maybe agriculture, is something like that, is it going to fly?
It depends on the emphasis. If the project is about helping smallholder farmers, rural communities, improve their livelihoods, make them climate resilient, and that is the major focus, with a small focus on applications, and as long as it's focused on subsistence farmers, we could get away with grant finance. But the question will be raised, and we would need to defend it as to why these communities can't take out credit to be able to pay for these applications. That will always be a question that they raise because of this principle of minimum concessionality. They don't want to use grant finance to crowd out the private sector. Okay, so it would need to be carefully calibrated. But if it's just a project on renewable energy, then for sure you would need to have an accredited entity that is a financial intermediary. Okay, and that can, the financial models that Miriam was talking about, for example, that would be something that financial intermediary could implement, but not UNEP, not under the Green Climate Fund. What we can do is we can use the experiences under EPIC and so forth to be able to help the country program, but you would need to choose the right accredited entity for that project. So it's a little bit tricky, but once you understand the rationale, then you can clearly identify what is grant finance, what kind of accredited entity would I need to go with.
And Cambodia, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And Cambodia has expressed a significant interest in applying for Green Climate Fund project focused on the nature-based solution. And we recognizing that the critical role in addressing climate change is impact and fostering the sustainable development. Giving it the vulnerability to climate hazard like flood and drought, we can be like exacerbated by economy dependent on climate sensitive sector. Cambodia see that nature-based solution as a multi-phase strategy to enhance resilience, reduce emission, and protect biodiversity. This commitment aligns with our broader national priority, including the national determined contribution and national adaptation plan, aiming to leverage conservation concessional fund to scale up climate finance and integrate natural ecosystem management into their climate action effort. Project in this manner would likely focus on areas such as sustainable land and water management, forest conservation and restoration, and promoting climate smart agriculture, all while striving to empower local community and attract private sector participation. Thank you very much.
And if you don't have any more questions, okay, sorry. Okay, yes, please.
Hi, yeah, I'll be very quick. It's just a comment, and I had to step out at the beginning of your presentation, so apologies if this is repetitive, but just wanted to flag that there is a little bit of precedent. I know that I think in 2021, there was a GCF cooling facility approved that was done by the World Bank. I think the code is FP177. I was just looking it up. There's 9 countries. It crosses, I think, buildings as well as agriculture, which was raised, and I think vaccination programs. So it is mitigation and adaptation. And I know that it was a very big challenge to get the adaptation beneficiary indicators correct. But just as far as this discussion is concerned, there are a lot of documents, I think, that are associated with that submission that are available and might be informative for any future efforts on this. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for that. 177, did you say? Okay. It's good to know.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So please give her the large applause. Thank you, Jessica, for your fantastic presentation. We get to know how GCF funding works much clearly. So I'd like to invite next speaker, Meher Jain, who is joining us remotely. And let me briefly introduce him. So Mr. Meher Jain is a senior disaster risk management specialist of the World Bank. And he has previously consulted for organizations such as CSE, TERI, PATH, and UNICEF. And Jane holds a Master in Environmental Engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a Master in Public Administration in International Development from Harvard University. So we will hearing from Meher about how this investment guideline of the sustainable cooling would work. So floor is yours. Meher, please, can you hear us?
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. First of all, apologies, I couldn't be in the room. I have this, the voice is coming back. Is there a way to switch off the sound? Yeah, it's good now. Perfect. So, this work that I'm going to present is a very small part of the work that the World Bank is doing on cooling and heat stress. So we have around 14 global practices at the bank. the energy team, the urban team, and the environment team. All three teams have some part of cooling in their ongoing operations. And we also have the private sector arm, IFC, which does a lot of private sector lending on cooling. And a couple of years back, we had something called the Tech Emerge program, where we were really looking at how innovative technologies in the cooling space could be scaled up. So basically, a matchmaking exercise between uh, innovators and solution needs, right? But this work that I'm going to present today is really about investment frameworks. It started off with the India Cooling Action Plan coming out in 2019, and the World Bank really was trying to see how we could really enter into that and try and support Government of India with taking the work forward and helping India achieve the goals set out in the India Cooling Action Plan. When we assessed the plan, there were about 128 odd opportunities in that plan. And as an investment entity, as we were trying to identify where to go, we did not, it was not very easy. So we initiated a study which really looked at prioritizing and then identifying what are the key areas where financing is required. And what we came out with was this report called the Climate Investment Opportunities in India's Cooling Sector, where from the 128 opportunities, we went to 8 opportunities and found that within those 8 opportunities, if one was to invest, you could really unlock the cooling sector in India. Majority of those were in the space cooling sector, and really looking at a $1.6 trillion investment potential. And based off of that, we are now working with the Government of India on 2 projects. The first one is on expanding the domestic manufacturing of sustainable cooling devices. This is basically with the Ministry of Commerce looking at supply chains for room ACs and fans and district cooling, and really looking at how the supply chains can be made more resilient and India can become self-reliant in this space. Currently, about 80 to 85% of the overall equipment that India uses is imported. And the other one is, a couple of speakers have spoken about passive design, the largest affordable housing program, one of the largest in the world, where India is trying to build 20 million houses, really looking at how thermal comfort and passive design can be mainstream. And that's, what the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana or the Prime Minister's affordable housing program for the rural sector is. So really working with those 2 programs to try and see how you can leverage, both government and private capital to see how impact can be achieved at scale. So the one on manufacturing is about $700 million. The one for passive design is about $500 million. Next slide, please. So based on this experience, we started interacting with the UNEP team, which obviously has a huge footprint, and we realized that there is a need to create a financing framework. The India example could be used to try and help countries from across the world really look at how financing can be made available. Countries have cooling action plans. They have NCAPs, the NCAPs and the NDCs. But really, how do you take those action plans and convert them into financing plans? That's really what the intent of this exercise is that we've initiated. The motivation is these 4 pillars. One is that it should be evidence-based. So based on the work that we've done in India and experience from a few other countries, an adaptive framework, right? So it should fit a small country like a SIDS right up to an advanced or a developed economy to really look at how cooling needs can be financed. Action oriented, really looking at bankable projects with very strong monitoring frameworks and global integration, right? So as you know, countries have these multiple agreements or commitments that they've signed up to. How do you ensure that the plan that you develop really aligns with that? Next slide, please. So the guiding framework that we've used for it is very similar to the one that we used in India. The second part of it, especially the prioritization and implementation, is very similar. The assessment part of it is something that we've just added. So based on the country classification, one would really like to see where the country is, what the goals are, and having a good understanding of what the different needs of the in terms of cooling are, right? So in terms of space cooling, cold chains, refrigerant transition, mobile air conditioning, have a strong baseline of data. Based off of that, understand what are the priorities for the country. I think each country has a very different set of priorities. This one of the questions before to the last speaker was around whether cold chains can be prioritized. Yes, as a country, if your cold chains are a priority, then that should really come out in this assessment. The prioritization really looks at a multi-criteria framework, which I'll go through in a subsequent slide, really looking at everything from your development needs to the mitigation and adaptation impact to really what is available in terms of implementability and how does that work. And then the last part is, really having actionable roadmaps that countries can then adopt and start financing either through public investments or leveraging public investments to draw in more private capital. Next slide, please. So just wanted to go through some of the key considerations that we put in place to really try and understand how we would classify countries. So this is just this entire work is currently being developed. So at the end of this presentation, I would really appreciate any feedback that you want to give in terms of how we could restructure or how we could improve this framework. But from a country classification perspective, we are looking at four primary categories. One was the vulnerability, one was the developmental status, the agroecological zones, and the policy commitment. And really looking at how within these can we fit in countries, right? And I think the one more tier would be there are countries that have cooling action plans, countries that have NDCs that include cooling. Then there will be countries that neither have cooling action plans nor do they mention cooling in the NDC sector. But really, how will those countries make cooling a priority as they go forward? And based on that, we found four of these tiers that would be there. One is a country that is climate extremely vulnerable to climate change with low capacity. Second one would be vulnerability with medium capacity. Third is moderate climate risk and high capacity. And the fourth could be advanced economies. Next slide, please. Uh, in terms of the assessment, the next part is really understanding the cooling needs. And as I had mentioned earlier, to really understand sectorally what the overall cooling demand is, right? And that could work from an NDC and cap perspective, or really looking at where do you want to go with this, right? What is the long-term, vision for the sector? And developing putting in place systems that allow you to capture data that also then allow you to take more guided decisions based on that. And then coming down to national cooling profiles, right? And this links up to the EPIC work and also to the work that is being done on a lot of the other NCAPs to really identify what are the most vulnerable parts of your population, what are the most vulnerable parts of your supply chains. For instance, in India, we found that the supply chain, key components like compressors are the big, are the areas where we need to focus. So really going from 30,000 feet down to, 100 feet view to try and understand what the needs are and putting in place systems that are required to capture the data and then use that data to make informed decisions. Next slide, please. And then come this part, the multi criteria sectoral prioritization framework. I think this is really the heart of any financial assessment framework. Primarily because each country has a very different need, both from a financing perspective and from a development perspective. And what the country wants to prioritize really needs to come out. And that's why we really kept this at three levels. The first one being the benefits, right? The climate and the development benefits. The second is really looking at the ease of implementation, whether it's the technical feasibility, the likelihood of large scale adoption, the administrative or political willingness to be able to, to be able to enact a few things. And then the last part is the financing, right? There will be certain sectors where it will be easier to attract financing, and there will be others where it might be harder to attract financing, and that's probably where the public sector needs to step up a bit more. Next slide, please. So if you, just to give you an example of the previous, of the framework, if you look at efficient air conditioning, right, uh, you know, it is, it has a very high GHG mitigation potential. It has financial viability because companies know exactly what they are funding and what exactly really is the emission benefit that you get. Policy feasibility, again, if you talk about maps, if you talk about, really pushing out, efficient air conditioning, the playbook is fairly well established. Scalability is again easier to get in this because AC ownership is easier to push for. But in terms of the development co-benefits, we felt that was slightly lower, primarily because not everyone can really afford an air conditioner. So you do leave out a substantial population if you're talking about a developing or an underdeveloped country. And that's where something like a passive roof, cooling roof solution scores much higher because that is something that could be done more unanimously. Next slide, please. So the foundation of the financing and investment toolkit is really looking at, a, a framework that allows for blending. How do you get the public capital and the private investments to come together? De-risking, where early stage mitigation and capacity building can be done through public funds. Really looking at if there are startups, if there are innovative uh, entities that are willing to push for solutions, how can you support them? Uh, Looking at different types of models under innovative access. So pay as you go on the financing, looking at green bonds, also looking at carbon markets to really look at how you can bring down the cost of capital. And then the market mobilization, right? So here, I think there is also a paper from the World Bank on cooling bonds. There are rhino bonds that have been already issued. So really looking at cooling as a sector and whether it can really provide for accessing finance the same way. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of how one could approach financing. So again, a four-step process, an assessment. This is from a cold chain's perspective, looking at what the perishable load is, what the current capacity is, then looking at where this is going, as I had mentioned right at the beginning, projecting that demand out, looking at what is the demand for infrastructure and logistics, then identifying the interventions that go with it to meet that projected demand, and then looking at the investments that are required in this. So, in a nutshell, what we are trying to do is give uh, give countries a framework through which they can really take their action plans and NDCs into action and really find the bankable projects that exist. Next slide, please. So this, in a sense, is my last slide. Really looking at, what are using this framework, can we get the policy integration, the project pipeline, identify ways to mobilize the finance, and then have a strong reporting structure around it. And it's essentially an overall, it's a cyclical loop, right? Where each time you do an intervention, you will go back to improving it with better monitoring, policy integration, and then identifying other entry points. So the long-term goal is to align with the Paris Agreement's enhanced transparency framework and to deliver a robust, quantified, and finance-ready cooling component for the NDC and CAP, and also help implement the cooling pledge. I'll stop here. I do have a set of questions that I will leave you all with, which are in terms of each of the countries that are here. Can you start thinking about what your cooling priorities are, whether it's sectors, whether it's the vulnerability of the population, what is the single biggest barrier that you see to identifying cooling projects? What are the data points that you think are hardest to identify, right? So, for example, in India, the building stock, the future building stock was the hardest number for us to find. And the last is how can our framework that we are developing right now alongside UNEP really help you achieve the goals that you've set up, either through for your NDCs or the Global Cooling Pledge, and the timeline for us to deliver this framework is about September or October of this year. So there are at least 3 or 4 months ahead of us. So any feedback at this point would be really appreciated. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meho, for the comprehensive presentation on the investment guideline. I think that in the interest of time, maybe we don't have the, enough time to discuss all these questions. However, if you want to give any observations based on Meho's presentation or based on these questions, we can take maybe 1 or 2 observations from the countries now. And if not, maybe I think that we still have opportunities to collate your feedback later after this meeting. So we really appreciate if we can get your input on it. So, okay, so thank you very much, Meho, for the presentations. Do you want to say something finally, or?
No, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So, so this is the end of the finance session.